This is Michelle, and welcome to this week's live. And thank you for being here and for listening. So, this week we're going to continue on to talk about balancing hormones and women's health. So, I'm going to do a small recap of some of what we talked about last week, which was in regards to hormone balancing and PMS. And then we're going to move on to a related subject. So, just here from last week. So, the term PMS covers a wide range of symptoms, sleep disturbances, fluid retention, bloating, joint pain, brain fog, breast tenderness. These are all really common symptoms that a lot of people experience just before the menstrual cycle. And even though these are normalized, they're not actually normal. And a lot of people get prescribed birth control pills or other forms of hormonal interventions to mitigate this, which is actually not the best way to balance hormones naturally, because what that does is just suppress the symptoms. It doesn't actually heal. And that's kind of what we've been covering in the previous modules. Um, so we talked about a lot of memes in popular culture that talk about PMS, and this kind of works to normalize it. So how does PMS work? Again, we spoke about hormone resiliency. So you might notice that in the middle of the cycle, you feel energetic and happy and, able to work out and do a lot of social activities. And this is when estrogen is high, and we feel the complementary benefit of that boost in serotonin due to estrogen being high. And what happens later in the cycle is that we're supposed to have a surge of progesterone, and this actually helps to buffer and cushion the blow of estrogen falling later on in the cycle. Um, and what happens when we don't have enough uh, progesterone is that we get what's called estrogen dominance, and the buffering of the falling estrogen doesn't happen so well because of low progesterone. And estrogen dominance is also responsible for many PMS symptoms. Um, so Julia is going to share a QR code with an example of an amazing salad. It's Ray Peat's pro-metabolic estrogen dominant salad. It's essentially a salad that, because of the way that carrots have a lot of fiber and the fibers run up and down in the carrot itself, peeling the carrots in this specific way in the ribbons that you'll see here on the recipe helps to keep the fiber intact, and the fiber allows estrogen to be metabolized and detoxified in the body, because a lot of well, one of the reasons why estrogen dominance happens is due to digestion and sluggish liver, and basically the body's inability to detoxify estrogen. So, moving on to okay, so in the previous weeks we also talked about what the pill does to our cycle as opposed to a natural cycle. Here you'll see a natural estrogen progesterone curves, and then you can see below the very short, sharp up and down spikes that occur when we are taking synthetic birth control versus a normal cycle, and our natural hormones become flatlined. So this is not a great solution, again, to any kind of menstrual problems, because it just turns off our natural hormones. It doesn't actually regulate them. So, what are the really common? So, last week we talked about different causes for PMS. So, this week we're going to speak about different solutions. And the solutions are specific to what type of PMS symptoms you experience. So, depression and anxiety, it's often paired with inflammation, because inflammation impairs the manufacturing of progesterone and the responsiveness of progesterone receptors. So this means that you need more progesterone than normal to feel the soothing effects of it buffering the fall in estrogen that happens in the luteal phase. So without this, you'll feel this plummet of serotonin and dopamine at the end of the cycle, and this manifests as depression and anxiety in many people. So supplements specific to treat depression and anxiety are S-adenosylmethionine. This is an amino acid. St. John's wort, and also rhodiola. So rhodiola is an adaptogenic herb used in traditional Chinese medicine, and it's also used to treat things like adrenal fatigue and HPA axis dysfunction. So, a note on amino acids and mood. Um, it's important to remember that amino acids are actually the precursors to neurotransmitters. So, I like to think of this as it's almost like a recipe. So, our food and what we eat in the form, what type of amino acids, is manufactured in the gut, and then these different through different several processes, the neurotransmitters are created. So GABA, can help to create norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, and melatonin, and they all have these different functions that you can see on the right. So, without consuming enough amino acids and without metabolizing them properly, essentially, you're not getting the recipe that you need to create these hormones. And this is why, this is one reason why amino acid therapy is actually used to treat depression, because you're essentially giving your body the ingredients for the recipe to make hormones that make you feel a certain way. But this is also why gut health is really important when it comes to mood and anxiety and depression and these kind of things. And often, many psychologists will actually treat depression and anxiety just as a psychological phenomena, in isolation and in the absence of these other factors, which in many ways doesn't make sense because, of course, there is a psychological component, but there's also very much a physiological one. So, breast pain, this is another really common PMS symptom. There's all different types of breast issues that people have, especially in the luteal phase. So supplements. Oh, and the reason for this is again, it's mostly associated with poor estrogen metabolism because the breast tissues have a lot of estrogen receptors in them. So if you're experiencing, estrogen dominance, then it could be the case that you have breast pain. So again, the salad that I shared earlier on. In the presentation with the QR code, this salad is helpful in on that case. So iodine is also really helpful because it stabilizes and downregulates estrogen receptors. But a side note here that you need to pay attention to any kind of thyroid conditions that you might have when you're taking iodine, because iodine interacts with the thyroid. So it's important to not kind of just self dose, especially if you have thyroid conditions. And Vitex, also known as chasteberry, which we talked about last week, can also help to relieve breast pain. And I speak about the time frame of 2 cycles, although definitely, ideally, you want to be doing, any kind of change that you make, you want to be doing for at least 3 months before you start seeing changes. And this is something that many people go wrong with. They try something for a week and then they think that it's going to make a difference, in their cycle. But you really need to commit to a protocol for at least 3 months before you start seeing, with all of these supplements, before you start seeing the improvements. So that's important to note. Acne. So again, you might have noticed that skin is really good in the middle of the cycle. And this is when estrogen, progesterone are high, and then they drop down, and we have this skin deterioration. So acne is mostly driven though by inflammation. So again, processed carbs, dairy, refined sugar, these kind of things fuel inflammation. And zinc is one of the key supplements in fighting acne. So migraines and headaches. This is again a common PMS symptom that's triggered by a drop in estrogen, and many people report worsening before or during their menstrual cycle. So wheat products are a main one to eliminate. If you're experiencing premenstrual migraines, just eliminating wheat for one cycle might make a difference. So magnesium is a great supplement. So half of migraine sufferers are magnesium deficient. Um, Melatonin, this is also something to try because it reduces inflammation and stabilizes neurotransmitters. Although, a side note on melatonin, it's not really, it's good for short-term use, but not really for long-term use because it is actually a hormone that can disrupt our normal hormone cycles. And it also is, it's one of those supplements that it's great for sleep onset insomnia. So basically, it helps you fall asleep, but it doesn't necessarily deepen your sleep or help you sleep better. It's just about the falling asleep process. So it's good to not become reliant on it, thinking that it's helping you sleep better when it actually can even have a detrimental effect while you're sleeping. So that's important for melatonin. So vitamin B2 has reduced the frequency of migraines and also microionized progesterone because it works to calm nervous system and of course do that buffering that we spoke about. Um, so fatigue. So there's different types of fatigue. Some fatigue is just caused by inflammation. So if you're having a lot of processed foods and well, all the reasons, sleep, stress, food, movement, all of these pillars, and you're experiencing fatigue because of inflammation due to not hitting those kind of main pillars of health, then that can increase during during the premenstrual period. So supplements to support fatigue, again, magnesium, B6, and zinc. However, some people experience this adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction. And so often, if you already have adrenal fatigue or HPA axis dysfunction, it can worsen during the PMS period. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. But the best supplements, again, are magnesium, B6, and rhodiola. So, as I spoke about, rhodiola is a really great supplement used in traditional Chinese medicine for especially for HPA axis dysfunction. Um, so there are a few other adaptogens actually, which I can share, which are good for that. But rhodiola is one of the main ones. So sleep issues, sleep quality is affected by our hormones. So many people suffer from sleep disturbances as a PMS symptom. And again, magnesium and microionized progesterone are good for that. Um, so going back to the adrenal fatigue, so here are some common symptoms of adrenal fatigue that people have, or HPA axis dysfunction, however you know it to be called. And I think that some of these symptoms are sort of short-term symptoms that you experience at the beginning of fatigue, and then others are more longer-term symptoms. Um, and there are a lot of kind of questionnaires online that you can fill in just to kind of determine adrenal fatigue, just based on symptoms. But the most accurate way is actually to do a salivary cortisol test. So so here you'll see the sort of normal trajectory of cortisol throughout the day. It's really high in the morning when we first wake up, and then it sort of tapers off down into the evening. And we can actually test this cortisol by doing a salivary test. So what you do is you spit into a little cup several times a day, and then you send your saliva into a lab, and they test for the cortisol, and they create a sort of map of your trajectory of cortisol over the day. And you can do this kind of test in places like the Dutch test, for example. They do this type of testing, and you can kind of see, if you're out of range. So one common characteristic of adrenal fatigue is people who find it really, really hard to wake up in the morning. They're just really, really tired. And then suddenly at 11 p.m., they're super awake and super wired. And this is actually quite a common symptom of adrenal fatigue. And in that case, you'll see a very low um, morning cortisol, and then it will spike at night. It will almost be the opposite of this normal trajectory. So it's always good to find out before. I mean, functional testing is always interesting and good to do if you want to do a deeper dive into something like adrenal fatigue. So another PMS symptom is things like breathlessness and bruising. So this usually happens in the case of an iron deficiency, and this happens to people who have especially heavy periods and lose a lot of blood. So of course, iron is a good supplement for that. And as always, we recommend whole food supplements. So instead of taking something like iron biglycinate as an isolated nutrient, it's really good to take something like a spleen supplement. Out of all the organs, spleen is the most high in iron, and you can get some kind of grass-fed and organic derived spleen supplement, and that can be a great source of iron and better than taking a nutrient in isolation. So sugar cravings, they're also really common in the case of PMS. This is again because hormones that suppress appetite are less present, and progesterone increases appetite. So although progesterone increases appetite in the second half of the cycle, it also increases metabolism. So you're burning more calories. And this is really important to note because many people have this fear of gaining weight. Because they suddenly get more hungry in the second half of the cycle. And then they restrict themselves and deny themselves because they think, oh, this is bad. I shouldn't be eating more. But actually, your appetite is increasing and your metabolism is increasing, which means that everything balances out and it's actually fine and just normal to eat more during this luteal phase, and not to repress that. But however, it's, often people have this craving, this high craving for sugar, for baked goods, for chocolate, and these kind of things. And this will definitely fuel inflammation and then fuel the PMS symptoms even more. So it's good to pay attention to that and also to pay attention to kind of what you crave, because it can often be that something you're craving actually means something. So, for example, craving dark chocolate is actually quite high in magnesium. So, if you're always craving dark chocolate, that could mean that your body sending a signal that you're actually magnesium deficient. So, instead of just kind of ignoring, cravings, you can kind of use them and decode them to find out what signals your body is trying to tell you. Um, so to regulate sugar cravings, so sleep is a huge one. Wow, because the thing about sleep is that sleep really helps to regulate our appetite. And the different hormones that regulate appetite are shifted, when we sleep well compared to not sleeping well. So when you don't sleep for many hours, um, basically the hormones that regulate how hungry you feel or how full you feel are dysregulated. And what that means is that you will crave to eat, even in the absence of a need for calories. And this can really dysregulate cravings and it can dysregulate weight and appetite and all of these things. So, sleep is really important when it comes to cravings and weight gain. Increasing protein, especially in the morning when you're super insulin sensitive, it's really great to wake up and have a protein rich breakfast, which doesn't spike your insulin and which allows you to kind of stay energized throughout the day rather than being on some kind of blood sugar roller coaster. So, yeah, high protein breakfast, eliminating processed sugar, and again, magnesium and B6. So, as you've probably noticed, magnesium was mentioned almost, I think, in every single PMS symptom. Magnesium is the solution. So, magnesium is kind of the master nutrient when it comes to PMS. It's really important. And here are all the different things that magnesium does for hormone balancing. So, it calms the nervous system, reduces blood sugar, supports thyroid health, aids sleep, fuels mitochondria, normalizes progesterone, it's working on the nervous system, of course. It's basically activates vitamin D, and it slows aging and prevents oxidative stress. So all of these things that magnesium does really helps to buffer the effects of PMS. And this is why supplementing magnesium is often a good solution for almost anyone. I would say even people who, well, even men who aren't suffering from PMS, but especially if you are, supplementing magnesium at least 300 mgs a day. Um, 300, 400 is good per day to try to, follow that for a couple of cycles and see if it makes a difference to PMS symptoms. So there are different types of magnesium, and I can share an article on this and what each one does. But here's an example of the different types, and they all have different levels of bioavailability. They all do slightly different things in the body. Um, so here is an example of how to get magnesium from food. So these foods are quite high in magnesium, although again, as you can see, you'd have to eat a lot of these foods in order to get up to 300 or 400 micrograms, milligrams, which is why it's really supplementation is important because it's hard, if not almost impossible, to reach your daily magnesium requirements. And a huge part of that is actually because our soils are really depleted in nutrients, and that means that our food has less magnesium in it. So when you're looking at something like this graph showing the different magnesiums in foods, it's not completely accurate because it really will depend on how your food is grown. So as you can see here from this graph, the mineral depletion in the soil since the early 1900s is huge, and we have so many less minerals than we do now. And you can see, oh, I think I've just noticed here that I've cut off the actual minerals, but here the top one is sodium minus 74%. I think the magnesium is minus 75 or minus 48. But this is a list of all the minerals in carrots and how much they've changed from the 1940s to 1991. So, when we talk about getting the minerals that we need for food, we really need to pay attention to, where these vegetables are coming from. Are they coming from, an organic, regenerative agriculture farm where they're really nourishing the soil and using these regenerative agriculture practices like rotational grazing and, adding a lot of composting to the soil? Or is it a highly processed GMO pesticide vegetables where the soils are really, really depleted and probably don't have many minerals at all? And this is something to pay attention to when it comes to mineral uptake and the mineral density in our foods. So these are some of the things that cause mineral depletion. So fertilizer, soil overuse, acid rain, and pollution. And this leads to the depleting soils, of course, depletes the plants that grow on the soils from minerals and also the animals that eat the plants that grow on the soils. And then that leads to mineral depletions in humans. It's just, as you go along the chain, the same thing is happening. So here you can also see over these are all the different minerals. It's not really clear, but you might be able to see phosphorus, selenium, copper, magnesium, cobalt, zinc, and iron. And the quantities that since the 1900s, how the quantities of these minerals have gone down. and how the increase of GMO, glyphosate, pesticides, herbicide, fungicides have gone up over the years. And this is why it's really important to pay attention to minerals, and especially, in this case, we're talking about menstrual health and PMS, and magnesium is kind of like the master period mineral, and it's really, really difficult to get just from food sources. So supplementation for this specific thing is important. So I think this is it for the. Um, if anyone has any questions, I'm gonna check that out. Um, so, okay, so we have some questions here. Is there a specific diet recommendation for my teenager with heavy acne? She's tried the keto diet, among other things, but so far it's not been working. Um, so we spoke a bit about acne. So zinc is a really important mineral for acne. But again, when it comes to things like acne, the most important thing is figuring out the root cause. So, diet really does drive inflammation that then causes acne. So I would say that to do an elimination diet where you eliminate gluten, dairy, and refined sugar. Those two things, those three things are really, really feed acne. So if you can remove those for a month and see if there's any difference, that's a good place to start. But then, any kind of functional testing that you can do to find out about hormone imbalance, or maybe GI testing. And then also things like stress will affect hormones. And lastly, I would say also skincare. So making sure that her skincare is, you know, she's using skincare without too many harsh chemicals. And you can use the environmental working group database to type in the different skincare products that you're using to check for the levels of parabens or endocrine disruptors or anything that might be in the skincare. So it's kind of, I would say that obviously the internal environment is then creates the external environment, but it is also important to pay attention to skincare and zinc. Zinc is the important thing for acne. So, headaches, which vitamins can help with it? Brain fog, and lightheaded. Not sure if they're due to long COVID or due to hormones. So we had the slide here on headaches. I can go back to it so that we can have a look at it if you would like to review that. Again, so headaches, I mean, wow, headaches are really complicated. I actually think that there's a really great podcast by Andrew Huberman. So if you've heard of the Huberman Lab, he does a really comprehensive podcast that breaks down headaches, and that's good to listen to. But here you can see migraines and headaches. So this is specifically for um, m- if it's PMS related migraines. So this is triggered by the drop in estrogen. So it's good to be precise about and find out what's actually causing the headache. So if it is the drop in estrogen that's not buffered by the progesterone, like some kind of estrogen dominance, or some kind of inflammation due to wheat products, then these supplements, so magnesium, melatonin, B12, and progesterone. So they help with any kind of headaches. Um, so what's the best way to positively diagnose adrenal fatigue? So this is what I went over in regards to the salivary cortisol testing. So this is really the best way. And if there is a company called the Dutch Tests, and you can order it online, I believe. And you can also it's also our Dr. Shelton, our functional medicine practitioner, who you might have seen before on another on he does his lives also weekly. So he also does functional lab testing, and it's possible to work with him if you would like to address adrenal fatigue. But really, the best test is this salivary cortisol, which here you can see what the normal pattern is. But if you are really outside of this ranges, this could be a sign of adrenal fatigue. And Dr. Shelton can definitely help with that kind of diagnosis. So, is there a symptom between craving sweets and adrenal fatigue symptoms? Um, yes, I would say yes, because um, the thing is, often in the case of adrenal fatigue, people don't sleep very well. And as I said, they often have super low cortisol in the morning and then really high in the evening. And then what that means is that they struggle to fall asleep. They go to bed really late and then they can't wake up and they're sleeping for not enough hours. And lack of sleep really dysregulates leptin and the other hormones that basically regulate appetite. And that means that you can easily have cravings during the day if you're not sleeping enough. And cortisol also dysregulates blood sugar. So when you have high cortisol, this can then trigger blood sugar dysregulation, which also causes a lot of cravings. So and then there's also the factor, I guess, of depending on the adrenal fatigue situation. But, it can also adrenal fatigue, depending on if it was really stress related, there's also a lot of emotional eating and binge eating that sometimes comes in hand with adrenal fatigue. So there are all those kind of components, I think, that work to increase cravings. So okay, so I think we spoke about the testing. So that's we can do with adrenal testing with Dr. Shelton. I think that's it for the questions. I think I've answered all the questions. So yeah, thank you. Um, thank you everyone for listening. And I'm going to share um, the link of what I mentioned, the magnesium link. So the magnesium that talks about all the different types of magnesium and what function they specifically had as it relates to PMS and the menstrual cycle. I'm going to share that link in the comment section. And yeah, so one last thing is that we are doing. We just started this week the first cohort, the next cohort, sorry, which is the third cohort of the Phoenix Health Coaching as a group coaching program. And every week we go through different content and different pillars of health. And then at the end of the week on Fridays, we discuss the course and we ask questions and give some bio-individualized feedback and email follow-up. And that's happening weekly, and you can check it out at this link below. Yeah, as I said, the cohort starts this week. And yes, hope to see you in the next video next week, and have a good week.